A haughty instructor challenges a black student openly, not realizing she possesses a brilliant mind, an extraordinary IQ, and a perfect photographic memory. Perhaps, Miss Lawrence, you might want to choose a subject that demands less. Not everyone is equipped mentally to grasp complex biochemistry. The quiet that followed felt so thick it might have been tangible in the university lecture hall at Westridge. 200 pairs of eyes focused on Emily Lawrence, the sole black student in Dr. Michael Hammond's lecture, whose superior demeanor barely concealed the malice behind his words. Emily felt warmth rising in her cheeks. This was not the first occasion the professor had shamed her in public, but today he had crossed an invisible boundary. His remark targeted more than her answer. It questioned her very right to be there, a harsh reminder that some would always doubt her place in that environment, no matter her brilliance. Nervous chuckles erupted from a few classmates. Others looked away, embarrassed by the display of cruelty but unwilling to step in. "Answer the question, Miss Lawrence," Dr. Hammond demanded, adjusting his glasses dramatically. "Or would you rather admit defeat?" Emily inhaled deeply. At 22 years old, she had been underrated her entire life. The daughter of a cleaner and a bus driver, she had earned scholarships to attend that prestigious university through her outstanding achievements. What was suspected lay beneath those calm, calculating eyes. Emily began, her voice steady yet clearly heard. The Cas9 enzyme functions like molecular scissors through a two-step biochemical process. First, it identifies specific sequences in the targeted DNA by using a complementary guide RNA. Then Cas9 creates a precise break in the double-stranded DNA exactly at the intended site, enabling gene editing. "Doctor," Hammond frowned. The response was accurate but far from thorough. It was the perfect setup for further embarrassment. "Elementary, Lawrence. Even a first-year student would know that." His smile turned sharp and predatory. "Now explain the ethical concerns raised by the study conducted by Wong and others on gene editing in human embryos, published in volume 87 of Nature Biotechnology on page 834. If I recall correctly, this was a deliberate trap. That specific article was not included in the official reading list. Hammond had only mentioned it briefly weeks before without requiring its study. Emily met the professor's gaze without flinching. A heavy silence took hold as everyone awaited the inevitable failure. Then she began confidently. "The research by Wong and colleagues, published in Nature Biotechnology, volume 87 pages 834 to 841, highlights ethical dilemmas in three main areas. Firstly, it challenges the concept of informed consent since embryos cannot consent to permanent genetic alterations. Concerns about unequal access might lead to a new kind of social division rooted in genetic enhancements. Moreover, as the authors clearly point out on page 837, it sets a precedent for non-therapeutic alterations that could profoundly change the path of human evolution." Dr. Michael Hammond's expression shifted from arrogance to disbelief. He adjusted his suddenly constricting tie. "That is correct," he admitted with a dry tone, "though I doubt you grasp the more subtle aspects of the argument. In fact," Professor Emily continued calmly, "the article also highlights in its conclusion that maintaining a balance between progress and caution requires an inclusive global conversation. Wong specifically references studies by Garcia and Patel that oppose this perspective, arguing that postponing gene therapies has its own ethical cost in terms of human lives." The whole auditorium fell silent. Emily had recited the article not only exactly word for word, but also its related research. "Doctor." Hammond's face flushed a troubling shade of red. How could she possess such knowledge? How could an ordinary student recite a scientific paper mentioned briefly months ago with perfect accuracy? What the haughty professor and his peers failed to recognize was that Emily Lawrence was far from an average student. Beneath her quiet demeanor lay a brilliant mind ready to upheave the entire discussion, turning public disgrace into something entirely unexpected. If you appreciate this tale of justice and triumph, make sure to subscribe to catch other equally motivating stories. What will happen when Emily finally unveils her true capabilities? "Doctor." Hammond was about to realize he had picked the wrong person for his harsh academic humiliation game. The lecture hall stayed completely quiet as Dr. Hammond struggled to regain control. His pale fingers tapped nervously on the polished wood of the podium. His narrowed eyes fixed on Emily as if she were a puzzle refusing to be solved. "You seem to have memorized a few articles," he remarked at last, a cold smile on his face. "That skill can be useful, but it does not replace genuine understanding. Let's test your critical thinking, something no amount of rote memorization can replicate." Emily sensed the condescending tone in his words. The implication was obvious. To Hammond, she was just a memorizing machine, not a true intellectual. A student's whisper nearby reached her ears. "He won't stop until he embarrasses you. Consider this bioethical dilemma," Hammond continued, veering completely off the lesson plan. A distant community is afflicted with a rare genetic disorder. The only cure requires conducting experiments on their own children. This community lacks the means to fully comprehend the dangers involved. As a researcher, what would you do? Should one carry out such a treatment? Justify your response by applying Harrington's framework of scientific responsibility. The question was intentionally intricate and open to interpretation. There was no flawless solution, only an opening for Michael to challenge whatever stance she adopted. From her spot in the third row, Dr. Eliza Chun, a medical ethics professor attending the session as an observer from the department, furrowed her brow. Michael's antagonism was noticeable even to a newcomer. Emily took a steady breath. Professor, that question assumes a false binary. Harrington's framework, as detailed in his influential publication from 2019, highlights that such situations require a range of strategies rather than a simple yes or no choice. She went on, growing more assured. An ethically sound method would adhere to Harrington's strategy with 3 levels. Firstly, educating and empowering the community. Secondly, forming a council within the community possessing substantial decision-making authority. Lastly, a phased rollout paired with thorough supervision and the participants' option to opt out at any moment. Michael swallowed hard, clearly disturbed. You are plainly simplifying a complicated issue to a mere page in Harrington's text. Emily interrupted him softly. Quote, "The gravest ethical error is to presume that vulnerable groups cannot grasp complexities when given sufficient tools and time." They started exchanging admiring looks. Others were rapidly typing on their laptops. "Doctor," Chen leaned in, his curiosity clearly sparked. Michael slammed his hand on the table. "This is not a book club discussion, Miss Lawrence. This is serious science." "I completely agree," Professor Emily responded without any hesitation. "That is why I referenced exactly the accepted and published methodology for tackling precisely this type of ethical dilemma." Michael's face turned bright red. "Class is dismissed for today," he declared abruptly. "Next week, I expect a thorough essay on the ethical boundaries of bioscience. Miss Lawrence, you remain behind. We need to talk about your performance." As the students packed up their belongings, many glanced at Emily with concern. A curly-haired student named Zoe hurried over. "He is furious," she whispered. "I have never seen Michael dismiss a class before." "I will be all right," Emily answered calmly while organizing her detailed notes. Zoe paused. "Listen, some of us are going to Cafe Artemis afterward. You should come. We need to discuss everything that happened." Emily nodded, surprised by the unexpected invitation. As Zoe walked away, Emily spotted Dr. Chen walking toward Michael with a stern and resolute expression. When the room was empty, Michael shut the door with excessive force. "I do not know what your intentions are, Miss Lawrence, but let me make this perfectly clear." His voice was low and threatening. "I have spent 30 years building my reputation at this institution. I have former students at Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford. I have supervised more award-winning dissertations than you have had birthdays." Michael stepped closer, invading her personal space, and declared he would not let a transfer student using some memory trick challenge his authority in his own classroom. Emily stood firm. "It is not a trick, Dr. Hammond. It is simply how my mind functions." "I know exactly how it works," he snapped back. "You have memorized a handful of articles hoping to impress. Let me teach you how the academic world truly works. People like you may be admitted because of diversity policies, but genuine success requires far more than memorization and quotas." The underlying racism hung in the air like a toxic fog. Emily felt her stomach twist but kept her expression calm. "My final grade in this course depends entirely on your personal evaluation, does it not, Professor?" she asked, her tone deliberately composed. A dark smile spread across Hammond's face. "Exactly. And believe me, I am well aware of many subtle methods to ensure that difficult students find their proper place. I suggest you bear this in mind before our next meeting." When Emily exited this building 20 minutes later, the afternoon sky was growing dim. Her phone buzzed. It was Zoe sending her the precise location of the cafe. A blessing and a burden, Emily had already planned with precision what she needed to accomplish. What Michael failed to grasp was that by pushing her into a corner, he had accidentally granted her access to something far more precious than just a high grade. He had exposed his letters to her. And Emily, with her memory that captured every word, every gesture, every inflection, now understood her adversary completely. At Cafe Artemis, a group of students waited nervously. Among them was a young man carrying a hidden audio recorder, a device from his internship at the campus newspaper. Nobody there realized that the confrontation between Michael and the quiet transfer student was only just starting. nor that the coming days would shift the power balance at the university forever. After all, what would happen when the professor discovered his private threats had been recorded and that the student he had underestimated was about to unleash not only her extraordinary memory, but also her entire strategic genius against him? 1 week after the initial encounter, the university amphitheater was filled to capacity. News of Dr. Michael Hammond's open masterclass had spread quickly, a rare occasion where students from all faculties could attend the esteemed professor's lecture. On stage, Michael adjusted the microphone, clearly pleased with the impressive turnout. However, behind the scenes, something very different was unfolding. Emily specialized in biochemistry, yet it was Michael Hammond himself who she investigated relentlessly. She examined every published paper, every interview, and every thesis he had overseen. Her extraordinary photographic memory became a formidable tool, meticulously recording every contradiction and inconsistency found in 3 decades of academic work. At Cafe Artemis, an unexpected partnership had emerged. Zoe, the curly-haired student, was revealed to be the editor of the university's newspaper, while Ryan, the student carrying a tape recorder, acted as her assistant. Dr. Chun, who appeared by chance, offered subtle advice. "Are you certain about this?" Zoe asked as they completed their plans. "Michael has significant influence. He could destroy your career before it even starts." Emily replied calmly, "My career would be over regardless. He made it very clear that I would fail his course no matter how excellent my work is." Now sitting in the front row of the amphitheater, Emily appeared remarkably composed. "Doctor?" Hammond spotted her, narrowing his eyes briefly before launching into his lecture with his characteristic arrogance. "Today we will explore the ethical boundaries of bioscience," he declared, purposefully averting his eyes from Emily. "I will begin with my own contribution to the field, the Hammond principle of ethical proportionality." At that moment, Emily raised her hand. Hammond hesitated, clearly irritated, but ignoring her in front of a large audience would have been too blatant. "Yes, Miss Lawrence," he said, his voice thick with contempt. "Professor, before I proceed, could you explain how your principle aligns with the opposing viewpoint you supported in the Journal of Bioethics in 2018? A brief pause fell over the auditorium. Hammond blinked, clearly confused. "I am sorry, but I do not grasp your question. My research has remained consistent for many years. Actually," Emily continued, her voice steady and firm, "in your article titled Ethical Frontiers in Genetic Research, on page 142, paragraph 3, you explicitly claim that cultural and socioeconomic factors take a back seat to scientific progress, a stance completely contrary to the principle of proportionality you are about to introduce." Whispering spread across the room. Hammond's expression turned pale. "You are misrepresenting my statements, removing them from their context." "I can provide the full excerpt if you wish," Emily offered calmly, contrasting with Hammond's increasing anxiety. "Likewise, I can cite 7 other papers where you conveniently ignore your own ethical standards when it suits your corporate sponsors." The crowd broke into low murmurs. Among the audience, Dr. Chun observed with deliberate attention. Dean Blackwell, who had quietly entered from the rear, showed a disapproving frown. "That is entirely unacceptable." Hammond struck the lectern. "This is a lecture, not a forum for argument." "I fully concur," Professor Emily responded as she rose slowly. "A scholarly lecture must present coherent and ethical concepts, inconvenient contradictions that shift with available resources." She pulled a slim folder from her bag. "I have gathered all your most glaring ethical inconsistencies from the past 15 years, she said, pausing for emphasis, including your clearly biased assessments against students belonging to minority groups. The room fell into a heavy silence. Hammond was furious. "How dare you throw this at me?" He started to say, but was cut off when the side doors opened. 3 members from the university's ethics committee entered, led by Dean Blackwell. It was no accident. Emily had sent her carefully documented report to them 3 days before. "Dr. Hammond," the dean's voice rang out through the tense quiet. "We need to have a serious conversation." Hammond looked around like a trapped animal, then locked his angry eyes on Emily. "You do not know who you are dealing with," he hissed into the still active microphone. Emily stepped forward, her gaze steady and resolute. "On the contrary, Professor, I am fully aware of who I am dealing with. You once told me you had many subtle methods to ensure problem students found their proper place." She glanced meaningfully at Ryan, who held up a small audio recorder. "Luckily, I have a few methods of my own." The color completely drained from Hammond's face as he recognized the threat in his own words. From the back rows, someone started clapping, soon joined by others, until applause filled the entire auditorium. What began as a public confrontation had transformed into a moment of triumph. What began as the humiliation of a student had transformed into something entirely different, a moment of poetic justice sparked by the remarkable intellect that Hammond had tried to suppress. As the dean escorted a visibly disturbed Hammond off the stage, Emily stood still, composed, fully aware that the storm ahead would be fierce. After all, she had not merely confronted a professor. She had challenged an entire system that had permitted such behavior to persist without consequence for many years. The question now was whether the institution would uphold truth and fairness or close ranks to shield one of their own. And what fate awaited the gifted student who had dared to reveal the hypocrisy of one of the university's most influential faculty members? 3 weeks after the confrontation in the amphitheater, the Westridge University community was still shaken by what became known as the Hammond scandal. The ethics committee had finished its inquiry, and the findings sent shockwaves through the academic world. Emily moved through the halls of the science building, noticing how everything had shifted. Students who once avoided her eyes now acknowledged her with respect. Professors who had shown indifference before made an effort to greet her warmly. Michael Zoe hurried towards her, waving a freshly printed copy of the university newspaper. It had just been released. The headline struck hard: "Esteemed Professor Dismissed After Decades of Systemic Bias." The article laid bare how the situation unfolded. The investigation initiated by Emily's carefully recorded complaint exposed a persistent pattern of unfair treatment in Hammond's assessments, targeting Black, Latino, and female students. The dean requested an independent audit of all his grades from the past 5 years, Zoe explained as they walked toward the dean's office. Many former students had come forward with similar experiences. The university made an unprecedented decision. Hammond faced immediate suspension and was stripped of his mentoring rights. At that very moment, his office, a symbol of his academic authority, was being cleared out. In the dean's office, Emily encountered not only Blackwell, but also 3 university council members, and, unexpectedly, Dr. Chun. The dean began, "Miss Lawrence, first, I want to express our deepest institutional apologies for what you have endured." He slid an envelope across the table. "We are offering you a full scholarship for the rest of your degree and a guaranteed spot in our doctoral program should you choose to continue." Dr. Chun added, "I would also like to invite you to join my research team. Your examination of the inconsistencies in Hammond's works revealed not only an extraordinary memory, but remarkable analytical skills." Emily accepted the papers with composure, yet inside a storm of conflicting feelings swirled. The taste of triumph was sweet, but it carried a hint of bitterness as well. Emily was aware of how many other students like her had seen their dreams crushed over the years. "Thank you," she finally responded. "But my greatest worry is about the students who came before me, those whose futures have been undermined by prejudice disguised as academic evaluation." The dean nodded solemnly. "We are setting up a review board to re-examine past cases with the potential for academic restitution and, more importantly, a new blind evaluation system to prevent bias going forward." "It was Emily who proposed this," added Dr. Chun with a supportive smile. As she exited the administration building, Emily was greeted by Michael and a diverse group of students. Among them were faces she barely recognized, students who had been silenced but were now finding their voices. "You have sparked a quiet revolution," said a third-year Latina student. "Hammond once told me I lacked the right mindset for advanced research. Now I see what he truly meant." "And where is Hammond now?" Emily asked. Michael smiled. "I hear he is hastily packing his things." Apparently, 3 universities have already retracted their visiting professor invitations since the news broke that afternoon. In the now bustling Artemis Cafe, Zoe climbed onto a chair and clapped to get everyone's attention. "To Emily Lawrence," she toasted, "who taught us that knowledge is not only power, it is also justice." A wave of applause filled the room. Emily, usually reserved, Emily felt warmth spreading across her cheeks. Yet there was something incredibly freeing about finally being acknowledged, genuinely acknowledged, not simply for her remarkable intelligence, but for her bravery. 3 months later, at a national bioethics conference, a familiar figure came up to Emily after her talk on systemic bias in medical studies. It was Michael Hammond, visibly older, his former aura of superiority replaced by a complicated expression. "You destroyed my career," he said softly. Emily met his gaze steadily. "No, Professor. You destroyed your own career the moment you decided that certain students deserved less, based not on their mind, but their looks." He tried to respond but shut his mouth, defeated by the straightforwardness of the truth. "Your own words and deeds condemned you," she added. "I only had the memory to recall them and the courage to repeat them." As Michael walked away, downcast, Emily grasped a deep truth. Her photographic memory was an incredible gift, yet her true strength had always been standing firm against injustice, a trait no intellect could measure. Emily Lawrence's journey spread well beyond Westridge, motivating students nationwide to challenge long-accepted systems. She demonstrated that sometimes all it takes to transform an entire system is a single voice committed to speaking truth, even when that truth unsettles those in power. Ultimately, the greatest strength does not come from memorizing facts or holding impressive qualifications. It comes from having the bravery to stand against injustice when everyone else stays silent. Just as Emily realized, knowledge without bravery is merely information. Yet knowledge combined with a strong moral purpose becomes a powerful agent of change. If this story moved you and you believe in the ability of truth to change unfair systems, share a comment about a time when you saw someone underestimated but who proved their true value. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales of courage and triumph over bias. Every story shared brings us closer to a world where people like Emily do not have to fight for the respect they deserve.